Hey guys, I'm Naya and welcome back to the channel. For today's video, I decided to discuss with you the top 5 decks post Photon Hypernova. The set is going to have a lot of impact on the metagame, so I figured we would discuss what I think are going to be some of the best decks moving forward. The first thing to talk about maybe would just be that there is a lot of decks receiving support in this set, and there's also an honorable mention we're going to have. So these are just my thoughts on, the best decks, but there's going to be a bunch of options for you guys to pick up, I think, because like I said, a lot of decks are receiving support. So to maybe start things off with the honorable mention, I wanted to mention the Plunder Patrol card. Basically, Plunder Patrol being an archetype that's heavily reliant on the opponent because they need to have their attributes either in the graveyard or on the field for you to be able to special summon your monsters with the attributes. It's very much dependent on them. And that's not always ideal. So with the new card, what you're doing is you're giving them a token, you're giving yourself a token, and you can choose the attributes. So instead of having to rely on the opponent, you can just rely on yourself and on your cards. So with the Synchro, basically, you can place it in the Pendulum Zone, and in the Pendulum Zone, because it's a Pendulum Synchro monster, in the Pendulum Zone, it's able to activate that effect and it's able to give you plays. And I figured I would mention this because it's insane support for Plunder. And Plunder moving forward, I think it's going to be a very nice pick for you guys. It's a deck that's very rewarding when it comes to good technical play with it, and you can build it either with adventure or without if you want. There's many different versions, and yeah, I just feel like it's going to be an interesting pick going forward. And with that, we can actually jump into the top 5 decks. So for the first one, the obvious one, also they're not ranked like from best to worst or anything. It's just ideas, I'm throwing out there. And for the first one, and that one is very obvious, it's of course Tearlaments. So you can either play it as we have played it, the Tearlaments Ishizu. It's fine, the deck is insane. And actually, one other thing I would like to point out before we actually get started with the discussion, we don't know when the ban list is going to be dropping. So that heavily depends on a couple of these decks. If Tearlament gets hit, if some other decks get hit, naturally they're going to be a bit worse, but I don't think the ban list is going to be as impactful where it's going to like completely nuke a deck. I just don't see it happening right now because Photon Hypernova is introducing so many cards and so many engines, archetypes, where the meta is going to shift either way without the ban list. At least that's in my opinion. And with Tearlament, I don't think it's going to be heavily hit if it gets hit at all. So Tearlament can easily be played, like I said, as we played it, and it can be played with Kashtira as well. So if we are judging by the OCG, Tearlament Kashtira was a heavily dominant deck because the Kashtira engine is granting you extenders. It's granting you basically a connection with the Fenrir, which is like an insane disruption. But right now, you don't need to play the Fenrir as like this almost unsearchable card that you just have, because in the support you're getting the field spell. You can search the Fenrir, so you have a searchable disruption, which also bridges you to your Tearlament engine. So I think it's smart to include these cards in the deck. And also it's going to be interesting seeing how people decide to build their decks. Like, you can dedicate as many slots if you want to the engine. You can still play Ishizu cards. In the OCG, they left out the Ishizu cards altogether, but they did have some hits to the Ishizu cards on their ban list as well before the Kashtira cards came out. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens, and I think Tearlament is still going to be the best deck, especially with this new support. So yeah, that's it about Tearlament. And for the next deck, it's going to be Sprite. I think Sprite, again, is going to be an insane pick. Like, Sprite is not getting hit, at least in my opinion. And it's just a deck that's able to consistently achieve a board where you have many different types of disruptions and back that up with hand traps. Your game plan is basically, put up a good board, survive, and then just like continue to slowly bring the game down to your pace, because you don't always OTK, especially if you're not going for those kinds of cards in your deck at all. So you have to be reliant on basically just grinding the opponent down and just making it so you're playing it slowly, you're taking away their resources, and you're amassing your own resources. And the deck with their 1-2 card combos is insane at just being able to achieve those boards, still have follow-up, and have the hand traps and tech cards on top of everything, so you can easily adapt to the meta. And I think a deck that's able to adapt is like the best choice, at least in my opinion, because you don't need to be like afraid of a ban list, because you can just chill, see what's happening and then just adapt accordingly. You can play spell cards, you can play hand traps, you can play a heavy Bestial count. We've seen builds like that. You know, you can play the Kashtira Fenrir, which is also a great card. And there's also some interesting changes coming for the Sprite deck. In the Photon Hypernova set, we have the Gishki stuff, which can replace the Nimbo Beaver engine, because it's basically getting you to a negate, which is protecting you, and also bridging you to your Sprite plays. So it's nice. Some people are testing that out. And you also have the Tri Brigade Sprite versions, which they did gain popularity post the ban list in the OCG, so it might not be the route we're taking in the TCG just yet, but it's also an option. So no matter what happens to the deck, even if it gets hit, there's also different versions you can play, and I do think it's like one of the best choices on this list. So yeah, I definitely wanted to mention Sprite. And for the next deck, and this one is, of course, from Photon Hypernova, it's Kashtira. Like, obviously, I needed to mention it. So in my opinion, I don't think Kashtira is going to be like the top deck. You know, there's a couple obvious differences between the very best deck, like Tearlament, for example, and Kashtira. I still think it's very decent. It's probably among the top 5 decks. You know, I did include it in this list, but at least in the top 6, 7, or 8, I think it's interesting. You know, it's basically an anti-meta strategy that's heavily reliant on those busted cards that are like preventing the opponent from playing. You know, you have D-Shifter, you obviously have the Reishard, which is a Macrocosmos. You're locking your opponent out of their zones, you're taking away their resources. So what you're doing is you aren't necessarily, you know, doing your combos, playing your deck. You're just preventing the opponent from playing. And at that point, you have enough stuff to do that you would just easily win, because you have your own resources, you have your own monsters, your board, and there's different cards that can counter the deck. And it might not be, like I said, as great, but I still wanted to mention it, because if you're trying to pick a deck like that, you know, it's also an option for someone that's not necessarily into like a heavy combo deck. And it's also got like 1-card combos. You know, with Unicorn, you're able to achieve decent boards, and it's always cool in a deck like that, where when you have 1-card combos, of course, consequentially, you're able to dedicate a bunch of spots to tech cards. So some builds are even like, you know, maining Cherries or like maining Shifter, obviously, because you have enough space to do that. So I think it's an interesting choice. I think it's something to look into, because it is a very good counter to the meta. You can also main Lava Golem, like, or even Spear Mode if you want. You're not that reliant on the normal summon. You have a couple extenders, so it's like, it's interesting. You know, it's very interesting. It's basically a deck that's tailored to counter the meta. So yeah, there's another option for you guys. And for the next deck, I wanted to turn to Branded Despia, or Branded Vishio Despia, however you want to call it, or whichever version you want to play. It's obviously insane, because Bishios are acting as hand traps, and they're also acting as your engine. So it's engine and non-engine all together. And Despia before, when they didn't have that much space to dedicate to hand traps, you know, you would be a bit worse off in the meta. And obviously with tier being as great, Bishios are insane. But when the meta starts to shift, you might not want to be as reliant on something as specific as Bishios, but because it's like in another deck, but because it's like almost engine for you, because it's working so well with your deck, it's still a nice choice moving forward. And not to mention, you're getting new cards in Photon Hypernova, and with the Lindworm and the Guignol, the Finale Dragon, like both of them are really, really nice. And you can establish them quite easily. You know, for the Guignol, you're basically summoning another fusion. With Lindworm, you're negating effects, you're bouncing a monster. And if you include the fusion deployment, which some builds are including, you're able to get them to the materials on Guignol more easily. So that's also really nice. And also, like, you're basically establishing interesting boards. You have so many different things you're able to put up. And with the inclusion of Bishios, you can also put up Branded Beast. You have Branded Regained to get more resources. And also, if you get to Lubelion, and also a way to, like, Branded Fusion, Aluber, a way to fuse, basically, and you already have access to your Bishio side of things, you can also send the Mercurier as a dark monster. You can banish it, so you get resources, you know, to summon the Bishio. So, like, you get Cartesia, again, easily. So you have different lines of play, and I think when you learn that type of deck where it's like very rewarding, I just think it's a very, very nice choice. And the next piece of support to mention is going to be the new Bishio card, the Ball Drake. So it is among if not the best Bestial card. Obviously, it's working as a quick effect, special summon, hand trap, all of that as the other ones, but it's also got a very, very nice second effect where it banishes a Fusion Synchro, Xyz, Link, or Ritual monster, but tributing another like light or dark monster. So I think the deck, like, not to mention, it's receiving support. Like, it was legit announced probably a couple hours back. I'm not sure. I started to see it like when I woke up today. So it's getting more and more cards, and the core is also quite accessible. So I think if you pick that up, I think you're going to just be set for a couple months. And yeah, I just preach for the Brenda Despia deck. I think it's insane, honestly. And as the last deck I wanted to mention, it's going to be Flunder. Now, Kashtira is a good choice. It's anti-meta, it's stun, and Flunder might be hit on the ban list. So some people might stray away from Flunder, and also like it's a bit weird to go up against Kashtira cards. They are taking away your resources as well. Like Fenrir banishing your birds, it can be annoying, but you know, Flunder is still Flunder. Like you're still, if the ban list doesn't happen, you still have Barrier Statue, which is stunning most of the meta. So I think it's going to be a nice contender moving forward still. And also, you don't get that hurt by the Kashtira, like, D-shifter, by Kashtira locking zones. You don't need that many zones, honestly. And you also have enough space to play tech cards that actually counter the meta. So you can main deck cards to go up against decks like Kashtira, Tier Limits Kashtira, and whatever. And you just, you know, play going second cards, you break the board, you establish your Flunder board, and at that point, you're probably winning. So I think it's still a nice choice. It's also a cheap deck again. So like, if you want that type of deck, you know, you can just pick it up and play it, because I don't think it's a bad choice. Even if it gets hit, you know, it might not even happen. It might not even happen that soon. So I still think you're not exactly minusing if you purchase Flunder. So, you know, there's good things about it. There's downsides to it as well. You would need to have some type of extender to play through a couple of things if you're going up against Kashtira and things like that. And again, you're a bit more reliant on the ban list because Wind Barrier Statue is an issue. So in taking that, all of that into account, you can make your choices for yourself, of course, but I did want to bring that deck as an option for you guys as well. So yeah, those would be the top 5 decks, but like I said, a lot of decks are receiving support. There's a ton of options. You also have the Amazing Defenders set, which is introducing the Mikanko stuff, which seems very interesting, and we have seen some builds on YouTube of, you know, Libromancer, Mikanko, things like that. So there's many decks to turn to, but yeah, if there's any other options that you guys feel like are out there and you want to talk about them, of course, you can always do it in the comments down below. And of course, if you like the video, please like it and sub to the channel. Check out all the social media, and I'll see you guys in the next video.